Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay, hi, Sakshi. Apologies for these technical issues. Are we waiting for other people to join?
Yes, sir. 23 people are here.
Okay, we are expecting another 70, 80, but let's start. I think it's time. Um, okay, great. I can see lots of friends here. I can see Rakhi, Viraf, Rajesh.
I seem
Fantastic.
to have sign-in problems, Sandy. That's why there's
So,
it. Maybe give 5 minutes.
okay, that's cool. Um, Fantastic. Sakshi, you'll have to tell me when to start. Sakshi, you'll have to tell me when to start, huh?
Yes, sir.
Great. Guys, give us a couple more minutes and we will start. Hi, Ankur. I can see Ankur. Saroja, can you hear me? Are you there? Good. Sakshi, we can't hear the audio. Sakshi, we can't hear the audio.
नाते कैसे जुड़े तू रेशम सी परी मुझ में क्या है सादगी रास्ते मुड़े हुए हम तुम अलग है फर्क है फर्क है फर्क है अर्ज में तू फलक है फर्क है फर्क है फर्क है मैं बेरंग तू चमक है फर्क है फर्क है फर्क है
Thank you, Sakshi. I think that's enough and we can start now. Good afternoon, everybody, and apologies for this 15 minutes delay. As often happens, technology let us down a little bit this afternoon, but we are back in the game. Really, when we started this journey in 2016, we started helping workers who were getting injured in auto sector supply chain. And once we got to 1,000 workers injured in the auto sector supply chain, we started this series of reports called Crushed. So Crush 2019 was the first one where we covered 1,000 injured workers. Since then, I have to congratulate our Pillar 1 team, Raja, Masab, and their teams, who have now helped 10,000 workers injured and or sick with their ESIC healthcare and compensation. And this month earlier, we got to about, in fact, in excess of 100 crore rupee compensation for the workers. Now, with that knowledge of more than 6,500 workers in the auto sector supply chain, we have now this report with you, Crush 2024. The purpose of this report series, which is annual in nature, is twofold. One is it is to show mirror to the industry, to the public, to the government of what's happening in the supply chains, specifically for auto sector supply chain, and drive change in a constructive fashion with the stakeholders. So the bad news is that we continue to find thousands of injured workers in the supply chain of automobile brands. This sixth annual edition presents evidence of more than 6,500 auto sector workers, and the trends are now well established and unarguable, and they have been accepted. The 10 brands that we talked to, Maruti, Honda, Hero, Bajaj, Tata, Mahindra, Hyundai, Eicher, TVS, and Ashok Leyland. Apart from Ashok Leyland, everybody else is engaging with us. But one thing in this report that we have added, and it's quite significant, and I hope you stay back to see that later, is we are saying that we need to really start listening to the voice of workers, because they tell us what we don't know, but we should know, and we need to know. For the first time, therefore, in this report, we have a participatory research done by injured auto sector workers themselves on the safety issues in their working environment. 8 of them led this initiatives with more than 100 of their colleagues in the Faridabad area on a platform provided by us and guided by our expert partners, Praxis. Dheeraj is here from that team today. Their findings, their words, their recommendations are insightful and powerful, and you will hear that in a bit. Good news is that there is finally some hard evidence of reduction in injuries. In Haryana, where we started in 2016, we are now seeing a gradual reduction for the last 8 quarters in the suppliers of Maruti, Honda, and Hero. We congratulate them for their actions, some actions taken with us, some without us, but that's great. There is a beginning. However, a word of caution. We are also hearing on the ground reports that some suppliers, in fact, many suppliers are being asked to report 0 accidents. That's the right thing to do. However, this may be discouraging accident reporting further. We will investigate this in the next year's Crush 2025. If this were to be true, this is not only a loss of information, but also is a grave healthcare and financial loss to these already disabled workers and their families. We now also have stronger evidence on the worst plight of women workers in these families, in these factories. Mostly employed as lowly paid helpers, they are instead being asked to operate dangerous power press machines, underpaid compared to men, with no separate toilets in most factories. We need to improve their situation if we want more women employment in Indian manufacturing. This report also details the lack of appropriate employer-employee relationships. Most do not have appointment letters or salary slips. Their working hours are underreported in wage calculations. They work more than legal 48 hours cap per week while not being paid legal overtime wages. Many of their accident reports have false information pointing responsibility at workers rather than employers. We are grateful that more than 25 stakeholders in industry and government that we are engaging with for the past few years are responding to us, although sporadically, and many actions are afoot, albeit painfully slowly. There is a long way to go. Special thanks are due for this report to Siddharth, who has analyzed and drafted this report, Dhanraj for edits, Saroja for guiding the report, Dheeraj from Praxis for participatory research, and everybody else in this Safe in India team that there are too many to name right now. And of course, our advisors and supporters, many of you are here today. Our country needs these improvements to scale up our supply chains and compete better globally. We are focused on auto sector, which, as you know, is 1/3 of Indian manufacturing GDP. The MSME sector where the supply chains are is only half as productive as global emerging market average. Indian labor productivity is 135th in the world. We in India forever cannot rely on the low road manufacturing based on low cost labor arbitrage. We need to take a high road for better working conditions, for the dignity of workers, their families, driving higher value and quality production. And all this is not possible with our current short-term jugaad mindset. So please join us in this journey. Thank you once again for coming together today. I'll hand over now to Saroja and Siddharth to present the findings of the CRUST report. Thank you.
So thank you, sir, for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to welcome you to the launch of CRUST 24 report.
Can we have the next slide, please?
Is it being presented or am I missing something? Okay.
So there's just a second. There's some issue. Okay. So CRUST 24, it's 6 in the series, and it continues to focus on occupational and health of workers in the automotive supply chain. As pointed out by Sir, highlighted by Sir, in addition to the analysis that we have done in previous reports, in this version of report, we have incorporated participatory research that's done by the workers in the community and a comparative analysis of gender disparity. Overall, in this report, data from around more than 6,500 injured workers that SII has assisted been analyzed. So almost all of the report find disregard and negligence towards worker. The analysis points that crush injuries continue to rise yearly, as pointed out in graph 1. More than 3/4 of the cases of crushed injuries are on power press, and this is common across both the locations of our Safe in India operations, that is Haryana and Maharashtra, as it is shown in graph 2. In power press accidents, double stroke is the most prominent reason for crush injuries. More than 3/4 of the cases of double stroke are due to spring or bolt or key damage, the replacement cost for which is less than 2,000 rupees. This highlights systemic negligence, particularly with poor safety measures. Vulnerable demographies like migrant and contractual workers are disproportionately affected. Contractual and migrant workers face disadvantage of not having access to required social security. Less educated workers or workers who have had no formal education are unable to understand their own rights. Accident in the cases of those workers whose age is less than 30 years affects them with the basic of supporting themselves, and it becomes a crisis for them in the next part of their life. Among those with age less than 30 years, the trend says that it's the proportion of those less than the age of 30 years have been decreasing. So it points that young people are joining less, which probably is a good thing. These are the vulnerable groups which continue to lose their fingers. As pointed in graph 2 and 3, lower the wages and lower the education level, the severity of injury is more. So overall, this highlights that factories are picking workers with zero power to negotiate, and largely with an agenda probably of circumventing the compliances. We also find that the factories do not comply to basic rules. This highlights lack of professionalism in the deeper supply chain that we have analyzed. Even after paying the premium, workers do not get to avail medical benefits as under the ESIC Act. A case which is prominent in majority of the cases of severe accident, where they get ESIC Pehchan card only after the accident. Additionally, common to all cases of severity, ESIC compliances decrease with increase in the severity of cases. Most of the analysis in the report brings forth the issue of human rights. So over 95% of the workers regularly exceed legally mandated 48 hours week. This leads to fatigue, low productivity, higher safety risks, and also impacts their basic life. Almost all the injured workers that were assisted by Safe in India have advised that they are not paid double rate fully for their overtime. As mentioned, more analysis was done in this report. In addition, on the issue of women in previous chapters. The additional analysis, which focuses on gender disparity, shows one important finding. Though men too face vulnerable, though men are too vulnerable in terms of education and wages, but women are more worse with lower wages for the same level of risk in the same job. Proportion of women paid less than 9,000 is higher than men, both as operators and helpers. It's important to point that 9,000 is below the minimum wage in most parts of the country. So I'll hand over to Saroja ma'am for the further part of presentation.
Thanks, Siddharth. As Sandeep had mentioned earlier, Safe in India in general has focused on automotive sector mainly because it has got about it contributes 30% of the manufacturing GDP, and the top 10 brands hold over 75% market share. And therefore, we believe that they can bring in the required change to change, this, as we just pointed out, the basic, unprofessional and exploitative kind of behavior that we see in the entire supply chain. And that is why our focus has been on these brands. And given that our operations are essentially in Haryana and Maharashtra, we find that the top 6 brands that most of the workers in the supply chain injured and come to us are from Maruti, Honda, Hero, Tata, Mahindra, and Bajaj. As again Sandeep pointed out, we have seen some great change ahead of us. For the last 8 quarters, Maruti, Honda, and Hero have shown we have found fewer people coming in from these supply chains. But again, we would have a caveat here saying that we need to watch out. And one of the key things that we keep talking about is we ourselves do not know what is the entire universe of accidents in India. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, but this is just people who come to us. But even this gives us a lot of optimism because we've been engaging with them for 8 years and they have discussed their plans, their approaches to reducing injuries. And this definitely makes us a little optimistic that things are changing on the ground. The graph in these three, for these three brands seem to be, opposite, but we would give them the benefit of doubt here. We opened our office in Pune in 2022, and there is likely that there was latent demand for the kind of services that we provide. And therefore, the number of accidents that we see have been going up. But this is just our optimistic view. We are hoping it will come down, but we will keep tabs and report to you again next year on this. One of the key reasons, as I was just pointing out, is that as a country, we do not have comprehensive accident data. We've spoken to a lot of state ministries as well as the central ministry, labor ministries, to just understand whether they collect this data or not. And we've not seen any on-the-ground action on this. The latest DG Fastly report, for example, for 2022, if you look at the last number in the lower part of the graph, it says in 2022, in Haryana, 48 people had non-fatal accidents. And SI alone has met 1199 people. With this vast gap between what is the reality on the ground versus what the government is taking as the measure, obviously the policy changes are going to be very delayed because if you do not know the actual quantum of the problem, you're not going to address it. Similar stuff we found with the 8 listed automotive brands who have to file their BRSR to SEBI for the last 2 years. We've analyzed the data that they've, the submissions that they have made, and we found that they've provided either incomplete data or minimal data or no answers to the voluntary questions or the leadership questions that SEBI has asked relating to accidents in the supply chain. Again, we do not know whether they don't have the numbers or they're not sharing the numbers, but we do know one thing, that in the supply chain, most of the factories do not have an accident register, which they are legally mandated to have. They are supposed to inform the state government of any accident, which they clearly are not doing. And more importantly, most other countries, you find people have even files of near misses, which they take very seriously to avoid having accidents. And we as a country need that kind of ground level change where we take accidents seriously and work on them seriously. And we believe that this accident data is definitely something that we need to work for. And it is not as if that the country doesn't have this data in some form or the other, because we ourselves know that ESIC has data on whom they are providing permanent disability benefits to. And that number is infinitely larger than the 48 that has been given here as the non-fatal injuries in Haryana. So we need to work together to get all parts of the government as well as the brands to come together and look at how to reduce these grievously injured. And next slide, please. And the participatory research that Sandeep again was talking about is actually another step, as we see, towards identifying what is the kind of data and what is the kind of resources that we need to put in to identify all the problems that the workers have. In this 1 year that we helped them carry out this participatory research, there were more than 32 meetings. The workers went out and met with their own colleagues and collected data on what are the various issues and how many accidents they see and what kind of accidents, where in the factory do they see accidents. And they've also made a lot of recommendations and their own expectations of the government as well as the factory owners and the automotive brands. We at SII have also been making a lot of operational and strategic recommendations, policy recommendations to the automotive brand for the last 8 years. We have a report called Safety Niti. I hope all of you have heard about it and have, please do go and download the report from our website. The latest version was launched in August. And in this report, we analyzed the OSH policies of these 10 brands and look at how they have changed over time. And this is just a snapshot where you can see where it started with how many greens and how many reds and how things are moving. But at the same time, you can see how many more reds are left for us to work on and get things together in this country so that we, as a country, we can be proud to say that we have minimum accidents, our productivity is going up, and we stand tall among the global players in this whole, manufacturing supply chain that we would like to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Saroja, and thank you, Dhanraj. Sakshi, I'll take over now, along with the group that is sitting in Gurgaon. तो मंजीत, आप थोड़ा माइक ऑफ ऑन कीजिए, मैं आपकी आवाज सुनना चाहता हूं आपके ग्रुप की।
जी सर, नमस्कार।
Namaskar. Sakshi, if you can pin both of us, please, on the screen. Just to conclude what Saroja said, we have two series of reports, Crush 24 and Safety Niti 24 now this year, going on for years. And Crush 24 will be launched now. The link will be posted on the chat and on the website in quick succession right away. And I'll move on to participatory research now. This session will be in Hindi. I'm sure most people here speak Hindi. Apologies to those who don't, but please try staying back if you can. Manjeet, namaste. Dheeraj, आप यहाँ पर हैं? धीरज को भी पिन कीजिए. Sakshi, can you pin Dheeraj? Yes, I can see Dheeraj, but can you pin 3 of us on screen, please? Okay. तो पार्टिसिपेटरी रिसर्च की बात शुरू करते हैं. सबसे पहले मेरा नमस्कार सुचिता जी, दिनेश जी, राम जी, सब ठीक है वहां पर? आवाज नहीं आई आपकी? आ गई. वेरी गुड, वेरी गुड. तो ये जो हमने रिसर्च करी आपके साथ मिलके, और आपने रिसर्च करी, इनफैक्ट हम तो आपको सपोर्ट ही कर रहे थे, आज उसके बारे में बात करेंगे, आपकी बातें सुनेंगे, हम कम बोलेंगे. तो शुरुआत में मैं क्या, मंजीत जो हमारे फरीदाबाद के सेंटर के हेड हैं, जिन्होंने अपनी टीम के साथ आपको सपोर्ट किया, मंजीत आप इन तीनों को इंट्रोड्यूस करें वहां पर और बताएं कि इनकी क्या मेहनत थी इसमें.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर. मैं बताना चाहूंगा कि हमारे जो 3 साथी यहाँ पे, रामजी पांडे हैं, सुचिता है एंड दिनेश पांडे हैं, सिर्फ यही 3 साथी नहीं, हमारे साथ में और साथी जुड़े हुए थे, रामचंद्र पौदार, धर्मेंद्र तिवारी, श्रीकांत और साथ में रंजन जी, जिन्होंने मेहनत करी. ये लोग फील्ड में गए, अपने घर के आसपास जो कम्युनिटी है उसमें इन्होंने दूसरे वर्कर्स के साथ में बात की, अपनी कंपनी में बात की, बस्तियों में गए और वहां पे दूसरे वर्करों से बात करके ये उनकी समस्याओं को नोट करके लेके आए, और नोट करके लेके आके सेफ इन इंडिया के फरीदाबाद के ऑफिस में आके, और इन्होंने उस एक दूसरे के साथ में उन पॉइंट्स को जो समस्याएं नोट करके लेके आए थे, उनको एक दूसरे के साथ में चर्चा की और उनपे एक विस्तृत रिपोर्ट ये बनाई उन्होंने. तो इसी के साथ में इन तीनों साथियों के अलावा हमारे जो बाकी के साथी जो हमें ज्वाइन नहीं कर पाए, उनको मैं इस बात के लिए धन्यवाद देना चाहूंगा. साथ के साथ में जो हमारे साथी है सेफ इन इंडिया से, सीमा एंड नरोत्तम जी, उनको भी मैं धन्यवाद देना चाहूंगा. इसमें उन्होंने अपना योगदान दिया. जी सर.
शुक्रिया मंजीत. आप अपना वॉल्यूम अगर वहां बढ़ा सकते तो बढ़ा लें, कुछ लोग बोल रहे हैं वॉल्यूम कम है. तो शुक्रिया इसके लिए. धीरज, आपसे मैं पूछना चाहूँगा, आपने हमारे को एक्सपर्टीज प्रोवाइड करी इस पार्टिसिपेटरी रिसर्च के लिए जो हमारे पास नहीं थी और हमारे साथियों के पास नहीं थी. आप इसके बारे में, प्रोसेस के बारे में कुछ बताएंगे? इसमें जो 5 स्टेप्स थे वो क्या थे?
संदीप, मेरे ख्याल से प्रक्रिया के रूप में एक्सपर्टाइज की बात करें तो कोई नई चीज नहीं है, पर सीधे तौर पे यह है कि हम वर्कर्स की बात सीधा वर्कर्स के जरिए कर रहे हैं, और जो रिसर्चर हैं वो स्वयं वर्कर्स ही हैं, वो खुद वर्कर्स ही इस रिसर्च को कैरी आउट कर रहे हैं। ये अपने में एक नई चीज है। यहाँ पे हमने 4-5 कदम खास तौर पर उठाए थे। पहला कि अ, जब शुरुआत की थी हमने, तो एक समझ नहीं बन रही क्यों जुड़े, आखिर क्यों बात करने की जरूरत है। और ये लगा कि वर्कर्स को ये आवाज वहां तक पहुंचाने की जरूरत है जहां तक पहुंचती नहीं है, इसलिए उन्होंने शुरुआती दौर में खुद से 8 से 10 साथियों ने मिलकर सेफ्टी मैप्स और बॉडी मैप्स बनाए और कोशिश किया सेफ्टी और हेल्थ के मुद्दों को पहचानने का। उसके बाद आगे बढ़ते हुए वो अ, उन्होंने समुदाय में बहुत सारी मीटिंग्स की, यही सेफ्टी मैप्स और बॉडी मैप्स को इस्तेमाल करते हुए, जिसके आधार पर उन्होंने फिर से समुदाय में जो एक्सपीरियंस है, और समुदाय जब मैं बोल रहा हूँ तो इस समुदाय में वही वर्कर्स हैं जो फैक्ट्रीज में काम कर रहे हैं, तो उनके एक्सपीरियंसेस को एक साथ लाने की कोशिश की। तीसरे स्तर पे वो निजी तौर पे भी वर्कर्स से मिले कि आखिर वो कॉन्ट्रैक्टर के जरिए हैं, किस तरीके का ऑडिट के रिलेटेड एक्सपीरियंस है, या हम जो इससे पहले नियर मिस एक्सीडेंट्स की बात कर रहे थे कि उसके लेकर उनके क्या अनुभव है। ये तीसरा कदम था। चौथे कदम में हमारे लगभग 30 से 35 साथी अलग अलग समूह में एक साथ आए, और उन्होंने जो भी हम जानकारी एकत्रित किए थे उसको समझने की कोशिश की। और पांचवा कदम, जो हमारे 8 साथी थे वो साथ में आए, और उन्होंने पूरे ये 1 साल की प्रक्रिया को देखा कि हमने क्या क्या जानकारी एकत्रित की, और उसके आधार पर अपने मैं अगर मांग शब्द जो डिमांड किया है उन्होंने कि हमारे ये 7 या 8 मेन डिमांड्स हैं जो कि हम रखना चाहते हैं सामने, उसको लेकर वो आगे आए। तो ये प्रक्रिया रही है पूरी, और मेरे ख्याल से आगे हम सीधा अपने साथियों से बातचीत सुन सकते हैं।
शुक्रिया शुक्रिया धीरज, आपके सपोर्ट के लिए। साथियों पे जाते हैं। तो आज आप देखेंगे कि हमारे साथी अपना जो उन्होंने ड्राइंग्स बनाई हैं अपने साथियों के साथ मिलके, वो कैसे समझाते हैं, उन्होंने क्या देखा, क्या समझा, क्या बताया। हमने भी उनसे सीखा है एक्चुअली। और हम सब सीख सकते हैं क्योंकि इनके पास वो जवाब हैं जो हमारे पास नहीं हैं। तो दिनेश जी, मैं सबसे पहले आपके पास आता हूँ। दिनेश जी, आप बताएं, जो फैक्ट्री का मैप आपने और आपके साथियों ने मिलके बनाया, जो यहाँ पर मुझे शायद पीछे नज़र आ रहा है बोर्ड के ऊपर, इसमें आपने क्या पाया, इसके बारे में आप क्या बोलना चाहते हैं?
फैक्ट्री के बारे में, चौक के बारे में।
आवाज़ बढ़ानी पड़ेगी, आवाज़ बहुत कम है। आवाज़ थोड़ी बढ़ानी पड़ेगी मंजीत, कुछ वॉल्यूम बढ़ सकता है?
के बारे में।
थोड़ा सा जोर से बोलना पड़ेगा, शायद माइक कमज़ोर है वहाँ पर। सॉरी दिनेश जी।
इंसिडेंट के बारे में इसमें हमने अति किया है, और हमने तो सारे वर्कर मिल करके एक कंपनी का ये हम नक्शा बनाया है।
हम्म। हम्म।
इसमें हमारी कहाँ कहाँ पर चोट लगने की जगह है वो आपको मैं बताने जा रहा हूँ। ये ध्यान दीजिए। ये हमारी कंपनी है, ये मेरा मेन गेट है।
हम्म।
ये सीधा यहाँ चला है, ये टूल रूम है जहाँ
ठीक।
की डाई रिपेयरिंग होती है। ये हमारा लोडिंग है, ये पैकिंग है, यहाँ भी पैकिंग का काम माल रखने उखने का है। ये जो है कि चेक करने वाला है, वो क्वालिटी का है। और ये गोडाउन हो गया। और फिर यहाँ से मेरा प्रेस शॉप हो जाता है। यहाँ ये टूल रखने का जगह है, ये मेरा पूरी प्रेस शॉप है।
हम्म।
और ये ऑफिस हो गया, एक गेस्ट रूम हो गया, एक गार्ड का रूम हो गया, और ये जो है इलेक्ट्री रूम हो गया,
हम्म।
ये स्क्रैप रूम हो गया, और इधर पीने का पानी, यहाँ टॉयलेट हो गया। अब यहाँ से हम चलते हैं कि ये हमारी जगह जो है पूरी खाली होनी चाहिए,
हम्म।
ताकि हमको ट्रॉली लाने और ले जाने की व्यवस्था सही ढंग से हो सके। नहीं तो बीच में कहीं ट्रॉली है तो कहीं भी खतरा हो सकता है।
हम्म।
यहाँ है लोडिंग में कि अब ट्रॉली लेकर के आए, ट्रॉली पर माल जो मटेरियल है, अब वो ट्रॉली के खुदा ने काफी पलट भी सकती है, नहीं तो हम मटेरियल उठा रहे हैं, हो सकता है हाथ से छूट करके पांव पर गिर सकता है, यहाँ भी चोट लगने की संभावना है। फिर पैकिंग में है कि ये पीस उठा रहे हैं, एक आध पीस करके एक कर रहे हैं, उससे भी गिरने से चोट लग सकती है। फिर यहाँ गोडाउन में है, अब ज्यादा ऊंची लाट लगा दिए सीट या किसी मटेरियल का, तो भी पलट करके आ सकता है, वहां भी खतरा है। अब टूल रूम का है, जहां वो डाई रिपेयरिंग होती है, वहां पर भी एक ऐसा ही वो होता है, उसके ऊपर रखा जाता है, ट्रॉली से ले जा करके रखते हैं, तो उसको यदि सही ढंग से रखा नहीं जाए तो वहां भी खतरा होने की डर है। अब जो टूल जो बनाते हैं वो निकालते हैं, तो छोटा छोटा पीस करके निकालने में या रखने में वो छटक सकती है, तो उससे भी वहां पर भी खतरा है। यहाँ पर है, हम लोग जब प्रेस शॉप से अपनी मशीन पर से टूल खोल करके ले जा करके यहाँ ट्रॉली से यहाँ पर रखते हैं, इसमें तो यहाँ ले जाने में, उस पे रखने में, उतारने में कितनी डाई में होता है कि नीचे बोल्ट लगा होता है, वो ऐसे करवट हो जाता है, कोई ऐसे हो जाता है, तो उसको वहां पर बहुत सावधानी से और बहुत अच्छी से रखा जाता है, वहां पर भी बहुत अधिक खतरा है, क्योंकि वो डाई पलट सकती है, और डाई पलटेगी तो डाई क्विंटलों को होती है, 100 किलो को होती है, 200 किलो की भी होती है, वहां कुछ भी हो सकता है, यहाँ भी खतरा है। अब हम आए इस प्रेस शॉप में, तो प्रेस शॉप में तो हमारा खतरा जो है, प्रेस जो चलती है तो उसमें एक चाबी होता है और 2 स्प्रिंग होता है। तो एक पैडल के पास एक स्प्रिंग होता है, एक हमारी स्प्रिंग होता है जो कि हमारी चाबी से कांटेक्ट होता है। तो वो चाबी यदि टूट जाती है या मनु खिया करके मनु हो जाता है तो फ्री हो जाता है, तो भीड़ ऐसे ही घूमना चालू होता है, नहीं तो नहीं भी घूमता है। वो मशीन जो हमारा स्लॉट है, हैमर जो है, वो नीचे ऊपर नहीं आती है। यदि स्प्रिंग टूट जाती है तो हैमर मेरा नीचे आकर के सीधे बैठ जाएगा, फिर ऊपर नहीं जाती है। वो स्प्रिंग टूटने के बाद वो हैमर नीचे आके बैठ जाएगी, या तो ऊपर रहेगी तो ऊपर ही रह जाएगी, मगर ऊपर नहीं रहती है, जहां तक के नीचे आ जाती है वो, क्योंकि वो फ्री हो जाता है, इसलिए वो नीचे आ जाती है, फिर उठती नहीं है जल्दी वो, जब तक कि स्प्रिंग नहीं लगेगा। पैडल के पास है कि यदि हमारा स्प्रिंग टूट जाती है तो उससे हमारा मशीन जो है कि एकदम डबल आना जाना चालू हो जाएगा, वो जब तक कि हम वहां बटन से बंद नहीं करेंगे तब तक कि वो बंद नहीं हो।
दिनेश जी, ये बताइए कि यहाँ पर आपने कितनी कहानियां लोगों से सुनी है, कहाँ ज्यादा नुकसान हो रहा है, संक्षेप में बताइए। आपका नुकसान या लोगों का नुकसान फैक्ट्री के किस हिस्सों में बहुत हो रहा है?
ये चार्ज है।
सॉरी, ये पीछे आवाजें आ रही है, म्यूट पे करें प्लीज। हाँ सॉरी दिनेश जी। हाँ,
वो प्रेस की यही है सर कि वो, और हमारे प्रेस शॉप में कंपनी से मिलने का चीज है, उसके लिए सेफ्टी होना चाहिए, क्योंकि ग्लव्स हो गया, जूते हो गए, चश्मा हो गया, एयरगन हो गया।
ठीक है। अच्छा दिनेश जी, ये बताइए आपका क्या नुकसान हुआ और कहाँ हुआ आपका अपना?
अब सुन पा रहे हैं सर को?
सुन नहीं पा रहे हैं सर।
आपको आवाज नहीं आ रही मेरी? आपको मेरी आवाज नहीं आ रही?
एक मिनट।
हाँ,
नहीं, ये सेफ ड्राइविंग मोड कहाँ से लग गया?
मेरी आवाज किसी को भी आ रही है? हाँ, सो सरोजा को तो आ रही है, तो इसका मतलब वहां रूम में दिक्कत है। अच्छा, मेरी आवाज नहीं आएगी तो बहुत प्रॉब्लम है।
सवाल थोड़ा
एक,
सा दोबारा से समझना चाहेंगे दिनेश जी सर।
नहीं, नहीं, आपको मेरी आवाज आ रही है मंजीत?
हाँ बिल्कुल आपकी आवाज आ रही है सर।
ओके, सॉरी अबाउट दिस। तो दिनेश जी, ये बताइए कि आपका और आपके साथियों का इस फैक्ट्री में कितना कहाँ नुकसान हुआ है, संक्षिप्त में बताइए।
नुकसान करीब साल में 4-5 हो जाते हैं, डबल जो कि
आपकी
ज्यादा
फैक्ट्री में?
हो जाता है। और 5-6-7 जो हो जाते हैं ऐसे हल्का फल्का।
हाँ,
और चोट लगने से भी लोग करीब 10-12 बच जाते हैं।
हाँ, तो मतलब आप ही की फैक्ट्री में इतने हो रहे हैं। धीरज जी शुक्रिया, सॉरी दिनेश जी शुक्रिया, आपके पास वापस आएंगे। अब मैं राम जी के पास जाता हूँ। राम जी से हम बात करेंगे बॉडी मैप की। जैसे दिनेश जी ने फैक्ट्री मैप दिखाया, राम जी हमें दिखाएंगे बॉडी मैप। तो ये पार्टिसिपेटरी रिसर्च की एक और टेक्निक है जहाँ पर हमारे साथी अपना बॉडी का बना के ये समझाने की कोशिश करते हैं और आपस में बात करते हैं कि शरीर पर कहाँ कहाँ रिस्क है और कहाँ कहाँ नुकसान हुआ है। तो राम जी आप बताइए।
सर जी सभी को नमस्कार हमारा। सर जी कंपनियों के अंदर बॉडी मैप इसलिए तैयार किया गया है कि इसमें नुकसान सर, पहला तो सर मशीन की आवाज से कान कान का दिक्कत आ सकता है। दूसरा है सर मशीन के कमी से हाथ भी कट सकता है।
एक मिनट, मैं राम जी आपको बीच में रोकूंगा।
और
सकता है या होता है?
होता है
देखिए,
सर।
सकता तो होता ही है, सकता तो हर चीज होती है। आप ये बताइए कि होता क्या है,
सो
कहाँ कहाँ
सर
नुकसान होता है? हाँ,
मशीन जो चलती है ना सर,
हाँ जी।
मशीन की आवाज से पहले सेफ्टी के अंदर तो सेफ्टी तो दिया नहीं जाता, मशीन के अंदर जो आवाज आती है वो कान का दिक्कत आ सकती है सर।
हम्म।
कान का पता पड़ सकता है।
आती है, अच्छा।
हाँ जी। और दूसरा है मशीन की कमी से हाथ भी कट सकती है। और प्रोडक्शन के चलते भी वर्कर लोग जल्दीबाजी करते हैं, इसके लिए भी हाथ कटने का डर रहता है सर।
हम्म।
तीसरा सर केमिकल तीसरा केमिकल से भी शरीर का नुकसान हो सकती है। रास्ते में अनावश्यक वस्तु होने के कारण पैर को ठोकर लगने पर भी चोट आ सकती है। अनावश्यक वस्तु रास्ते में रखता है सर, तो उसे ठोकर लगने से नुकसान आ सकता है। एयर गन पाइप से निकलने पर एयर गन पाइप से निकलने पर आंख में चोट आ सकती है। एयर जो होता है एयर गन अगर निकल जाता है तो उसमें आंख पे भी चोट आ सकती है।
हम्म।
वेल्डिंग जो किया जाता है, लाइट आने पर आंख लाल हो जाती है और पानी गिरने लगता है, उससे आंख खराब हो सकती है सर। भारी पेश लगाने में अंगुलियों में दर्द होने लगता है। काम काम होने पर घुटनों में दर्द होने लगता है सर। पीस का डिंपल बनाने में आंखों से पानी गिरने लगता है। ये
हम्म।
सबसे बॉडी मैप पे खतरा होता है।
शुक्रिया, शुक्रिया राम जी। धीरज, मैं आपको यहाँ पुल इन करना चाहूंगा। आपने एक साल से हमारे साथियों के साथ काम किया है। ये जो दो मैप अब तक दिखाए हैं, ये दोनों साथी बोल रहे हैं कि ये हो सकता है, और जो मैं सुन नहीं पा रहा हूँ कि होता क्या है। हो सकता तो है ही, होता क्या है? धीरज, आपने क्या सुना है और आपका क्या ख्याल है इस बारे में?
मेरे ख्याल से वो बातचीत हमारे साथी उसी तरीके से रखते हैं, पर ज्यादातर जो यहाँ पे हमने अनुभवों की बात की है वो सभी उन्होंने देखा है, या तो उनके साथ या किसी ना किसी साथी के साथ ये अनुभव हुआ है, जिसके आधार पर उन्होंने मैथ में इसको दर्शाने की कोशिश की है। और यहाँ पे कई चीजें अभी नहीं भी, जैसे अगर मैं कुछ जोड़ सकूं तो जैसे डस्ट को लेके है कि सांस लेने में तकलीफ, या जो अ, मुंह से और नाक से कई बारी काले रंग का मवाद निकलना, ये सब भी कई ऐसे अनुभव हैं जो कि वर्कर्स महसूस करते हैं कि, और उनको सीधे तौर पे इसका सामना करना पड़ता है इन स्थितियों में। तो मेरे ख्याल से एक चीज ये भी रहा है कि मुझे जो समझ आया साथ में बातचीत करते हुए, कि कई बारी जो पावर प्रेस के मुद्दे को लेकर बातचीत होती रही है कुछ सालों से वर्कर्स के बीच में, तो उसको सीधे तौर पे पहचानने की प्रक्रिया एक बन पाई, पर बाकी जो मुद्दे हैं उसके आसपास कई ऐसे मुद्दे हैं जो कि साथ साथ चल रहे हैं, पर वो वो नजर में नहीं आ रहे हैं, या उस पे बातचीत ही एकदम बन नहीं पा रही है इस समय पर। तो कई बारी जो साथी बोल रहे हैं वो उनके सीधे अनुभव है। मैं तो अभी वही एक चीज मेरे ख्याल से अपने तरफ से एम्फोसाइज कर देता हूँ कि, और सभी साथियों के पास अगर पूछेंगे तो बहुत सारे वर्कर्स के नाम भी होंगे कि किन किन को ऐसी दिक्कतों का सामना करना पड़ा है।
शुक्रिया शुक्रिया धीरज जी। एक ज़रूरी बात है समझना कि हमारी रिपोर्ट्स क्रश भी अब तक पावर प्रेस पे फोकस रही हैं, और इस बार पार्टिसिपेटरी रिसर्च से हमने जो नई नई प्रॉब्लम्स के बारे में पता किया है, लोगों के कान खराब हो रहे हैं, लोगों की आंखें खराब हो रही हैं, और कई दिक्कतें आ रही हैं। आगे जाके हम इसके बारे में भी रिसर्च करके रिपोर्ट करेंगे। ये हमारे लिए भी नया है, हमें पता था हो रहा है, पर हमें इतना नहीं पता था कि इतना हो रहा है। और हमारे साथी खुल के शायद अभी बोल नहीं पा रहे हैं, पर अगर आप हमारे ऑफिस में आए और उनके साथ बैठें तो आपको बहुत कुछ सुनने को मिलेगा। तो मैं अभी मंजीत, मैं सुचिता जी पे चलता हूँ। अगर मैप चेंज करके आप जेंडर मैप लगा दें तो सुचिता जी, पहले अपने कुछ अनुभव बता दें संक्षिप्त में कि आपका क्या नुकसान हुआ, और फिर बताइए कि ये जो आपने स्त्रियों के बारे में सोचा समझा, दूसरों से पूछा, उसके बारे में आप क्या बताना चाहेंगे?
नमस्कार सर। हम लेडीज 5 से 4 बजे के बीच में जगती हूँ और घर के पूरा सर सफाई करके 7:30 बजे ड्यूटी निकल जाती हूँ। हमारे टाइम से न पहुँचने के कारण 5 मिनट लेट होने के कारण हमारे लेडीज वर्कर के आधा घंटा 9 बजे के हाजिरी लग जाती है। इसलिए हम महिलाएं रोड पर रास्ते में दौड़ भी लगा देती हूँ कि हमारा टाइम ना कटे। और हमारी कंपनी के गेट के अंदर होते सेफ्टी मालिक मशीन में पर बैठा देता है या फोरमैन, फिर हम मशीन के न चेक कर पाती हूँ, न सर सफाई कर पाती हूँ। प्रोडक्शन के कारण हमें दबाव पड़ती है। हम 5 बजे 8:30 से 5 बजे तक ड्यूटी करती हूँ। उसके बाद 4 घंटा मैं ओवर टाइम लगाती हूँ। हमारे ओवर टाइम के पैसा सिंगल दी जाती है। फिर हम महिलाओं घर के काम भी आके करती हूँ। शाम के 9 बजे कंपनी से छुट्टी होती है, मैं 1.5 घंटा में 10:30 तक घर पहुँच जाती हूँ। फिर घर के काम करके सोने के समय हमें 12 बजे मिलती है। फिर सुबह 4:30 बजे जगनी पड़ती है। इसीलिए हम सारे महिलाएं वर्कर एक रास्ते में आते जाते हम बातचीत करें। फिर हम महिला वर्कर सोचे कि एक दिन हम लोग संडे के कहीं एक स्थान पे ग्रुप बनाएं और इस समस्या के लिखें कि हमारे कहीं ना कहीं सुनवाई होएगी। हमारे हाथ कटने के बाद मालिक कंपनी से बाहर निकाल दिया जाती है। इसीलिए हम सारे महिलाएं मिलके मीटिंग करके हम समस्या लिखें कि हमें कहीं ना कहीं अधिकार मिलेगी।
बहुत अच्छे से चिता जी ने बहुत अच्छे तरीके से समझाया। अच्छा, आप मुझे कुछ दिन पहले बता रही थी कि पानी की जो प्रॉब्लम होती है आपको, और दूसरी फैक्ट्रियों में जो प्रॉब्लम होती है, वो क्या था? उसके बारे में कुछ बताएं।
सर मैं कहीं देखती हूँ गाड़ी पर लिखे कि जल ही जीवन है, लेकिन कंपनी में हमें पानी भी अच्छी तरह पीने के ना मिलती है। जैसे स्टाफ के बंदे के फिल्टर के पानी आती है। मेरे हरियाणा में 2 तरह की पानी है, एक नमकीन है, वो नमकीन पानी वर्कर के मिलता है पीने के। वही पानी से मैं हाथ भी धो लेती हूँ और पीती भी हूँ।
शुक्रिया। आपके पास फिर वापस आते हैं। मंजीत, हमारे श्रमिकों ने बात करी कि क्या क्या दिक्कतें हो सकती हैं। आप 2 साल से फरीदाबाद का सेंटर चला रहे हैं, आपका क्या ख्याल है? आपने क्या सुना, कितने वर्कर्स का किस तरह का नुकसान आपने सुना है? ये सब जो बातें हो रही हैं उसका सबूत आपने क्या देखा है?
देखिए, हमारे पास जो वर्कर आए हैं और हमने जो उनके अनुभव से जो सामने चोट लगी हुई हमने उनको देखी है, तो बहुत सारी तरह की चोटें हमने लगी हुई देखी है उनको। आंखें खराब होना, हाथ कटना, उंगली कटना, पैर कटना, और ट्रॉली पलट के पैर कट जाना, या फिर पैर का अंगूठा कट जाना, या फिर केमिकल के कारण गंभीर बीमारियां होना, स्किन का खराब हो जाना। तो इस तरह की कान खराब हो जाना, बुरादा आंखों में चला जाना, उससे आंखें खराब हो जाना, तो ये हमने लाइव एग्जांपल वर्करों के मुंह से सुने हैं। वर्कर हमसे इसी विषयों पे आके हमने उनकी मदद भी की है। तो ये सारी चीजें इसमें हमें हमें देखने को मिलती है, और इन्हीं उदाहरणों से हम वो फिर मतलब कि दूसरों के सामने वो चीजें लेके आते हैं। यस।
अजीत, ये जो आप और आपके साथी हैं, नरोत्तम हैं वहां पर, सीमा है, दूसरे भी नए लोग आए हैं, आपने कितने ऐसे केस देखे होंगे? हर साल में कितने केस देखते हो आप?
हर साल देखिए, पिछले साल जो लोग हमसे आके मिले थे, करीब 1000 के आसपास हमारा साल का आंकड़ा था ये, कि हमने 1000 के आसपास ऐसे केसों को देखा था, और उनमें से करीब 400 से ऊपर लोग हमारे पास डायरेक्ट हेल्प मांगने के लिए ऑफिस में आए थे।
और इसमें से कौन सी ब्रांड्स के ज्यादा लोग हैं फरीदाबाद में? ऑटोमोबाइल ब्रांड्स के कौन से हैं?
ऑटोमोबाइल्स ब्रांड जो हमारे मैन है, लाइक मारुति है, महिंद्रा है, हीरो है, होंडा है, टाटा है। तो इन ब्रांड्स के ज्यादातर लोग हमारे पास वहां पे जुड़ते हैं आके।
ठीक है। एक बात, मैं दिनेश जी पे आऊंगा अब। दिनेश जी, मैं आपके पास वापस आ रहा हूँ। आपसे जब हम बात कर रहे थे दिनेश जी, आपने बोला था ऑडिट के बारे में,
जी हाँ सर।
है ना? तो ऑडिट के बारे में आप क्या बता रहे थे? सबको बताएं।
ऑडिट के बारे में सर, ऑडिट हमारे जो है कंपनियां, गाड़ी बनाने वाली को ये जिम्मेदारी लेनी चाहिए कि ऑडिट जरा ढंग से करें, ताकि हम लोग वर्करों से भी बातचीत करें।
आवाज गायब हो गई। आवाज गायब हो गई। एक सेकंड, अब मुझे आवाज नहीं आ रही है।
उनको उस चीज को पता नहीं है, वो आते हैं तो सब सर सफाई करा दिया, तो वर्करों से बात करेंगे, पूछताछ करेंगे, ताकि उनकी भी जानकारी मिलेगी सभी चीज को, कि हाँ वर्कर ने सही बोल रहा है या गलत बोल रहा है। ऐसे तो आते हैं घूर के चले जाते हैं, उनको क्या वर्करों से पूछने से पता ये चलेगा कि हाँ वर्कर के, कि हाँ तुमको क्या यहाँ सुरक्षा है, क्या व्यवस्था है, क्या दिक्कत होती है, क्या मटेरियल आप बना रहे हो, कैसे बना रहे हो, ये सब पूछने से उनको भी थोड़ा वो होता है। और हम जहाँ तक चाहेंगे कि एक गाड़ी बनाने वाली कंपनी को कि इतना वर्करों को पूछना जरूरी है।
जरूरी है, जरूरी है। अच्छा, अब मैं आपसे आखिरी हिस्से में ये पूछना चाहूंगा, राम जी से पूछना चाहूंगा। हालांकि काफी बात हो चुकी है, कोई एक दो तीन ऐसी सुझाव आप फैक्ट्रियों को देना चाहेंगे कि ये प्रॉब्लम जो है एक्सीडेंट्स की और बीमारियों की, ये कम हो और आप लोग बेहतर काम कर पाएं, क्वालिटी ज़्यादा बना पाएं, प्रोडक्शन ज़्यादा कर पाएं? इसके लिए आपके कोई सुझाव राम जी, फैक्ट्रियों को या फैक्ट्रियों के मालिकों को? मुझे फिर आवाज़ नहीं आ रही। अब आ रही है। अब अभी आई है, हाँ।
हाँ, सवाल थोड़ा सा रिपीट करेंगे सर? थोड़ा सा
सॉरी, आवाज अगर दोबारा पूछ लेता हूं मैं, कि ये जो फैक्ट्रियां हैं, इनके मालिकों के लिए आप क्या सुझाव देना चाहेंगे? कोई और सुझाव नया देना चाहेंगे? कुछ बातें तो हो चुकी हैं, कोई और सुझाव?
सुझाव तो सर यही देना मैं चाहता हूँ मालिकों को, कि वर्कर लोग जो काम, सभी वर्कर जो काम पे आते हैं, उनके लिए सेफ्टी के लिए सुझाव देना चाहता हूँ सर।
हाँ,
सेफ्टी अगर मिलता है तो मशीन बढ़िया चलती है। सेफ्टी क्या है, वर्कर लोग आ जाते हैं सुबह 8 बजे और मशीन चलाना चालू कर देते हैं, ना दस्ताना मिलता है, ना हेलमेट मिलता है, ना एयर प्लग मिलता है सर। ये मैं सुझाव देना चाहता हूँ।
बहुत अच्छे। सुचिता जी, आप सरकार को कुछ सुझाव देना चाहेंगे?
हाँ जी, हमारे महिलाओं को पुरुषों के बराबर सैलरी मिलनी चाहिए। और हमारी महिलाओं को साल पूरे छुट्टियां के बाद साल के 14 छुट्टी जो है वो मिलनी चाहिए। हमारे इलेक्शन के भी छुट्टी नहीं मिलती है। हम वर्कर संडे वार के ड्यूटी दे देती हूँ इलेक्शन वाली छुट्टी को। और 21,000 से जिस महिला वर्कर को सैलरी कम है उसे भी SI कार्ड मिलनी चाहिए। और ऑडिट वाले हमसे बात करें। और हमारी ओवर टाइम के पैसा डबल मिलनी चाहिए।
बिल्कुल साफ बोला आपने, बिल्कुल साफ बोला। दिनेश जी, आपकी कोई सुझाव, जो बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियां हैं, जो ऑटोमोबाइल्स की ब्रांड्स हैं, मारुति, हीरो, होंडा, टाटा, ये सब जो हैं, इनके लिए आपके कोई और सुझाव? कुछ तो आप बता चुके हैं, कुछ और?
उनके लिए सुझाव है कि सर वो छोटी छोटी जो उनकी ब्रांचें हैं कंपनी, उनको वो कुछ उस पर वो टॉर्चर करें ताकि उनकी कुछ असर पड़े। उससे हम लोग के जो बोर्ड में तो वहां लगा दी जाती है कि हम जूता दे रहे हैं, हेमलेट दे रहे हैं, ये दे रहे हैं, वो दे रहे हैं, और मिलता कुछ नहीं है, दास्ताने के सिवा कुछ नहीं है। टोपी भी मिलेगा तो वो जब वो आएंगे तो टोपा लगा दिया जाएगा, फिर वो खोल के धर दिया जाएगा, पैक हो जाएगा। तो ये सब उनको भी सोचना चाहिए, क्योंकि कंपनी, बड़े कंपनी हो या छोटे कंपनी, हमारे वो एक तरह से मालिक को होना चाहिए कि बाप, हम उनका बेटा हैं। और बाप को भी चाहिए कि बेटे से कुछ पूछताछ करना चाहिए, क्या दिक्कत है या नहीं दिक्कत है। मगर अब तो कंपनी की है ही नहीं, किसी वर्कर से कोई बातचीत नहीं है। पहले के समय में कुछ होती भी थी, अब तो एकदम बंद है। महीना में एक आध दो वो मीटिंग भी कर होता था तो वर्करों को बुलाया जाता था। अब तो सारी चीजें बंद हो गई है, कुछ भी नहीं है वर्कर के सिवा।
आपने मुझे एक बार कुछ बात में बोला था कि आंखें बंद कर लो, कान बंद कर लो, वो क्या था? मुझे याद नहीं आ रहा।
बस कोई बात होता है तो भाई इतना कह देते हैं कि मैंने देखा नहीं और मैंने पूछा नहीं और मैंने देखा नहीं, मैंने कहा नहीं, मैंने पूछा नहीं। ये तीन बातें कह करके वो अपना निपटारा ले लेते हैं कि हमने तो कुछ देखा ही नहीं, हमने कुछ देखा नहीं, और ना हमने कुछ सुना नहीं, और हमने नहीं पूछा नहीं। ये तीन बातें हैं उनकी। ये तीन बातें बोल करके वो अपना एकरी हो जाते हैं।
अच्छा बताया आपने। धीरज, आप कोई सवाल इनसे पूछना चाहेंगे? कोई बात मिस हो गई हो?
मेरे ख्याल से ज्यादातर तो साथियों ने अपनी बातें रख दी हैं। अगर कोई भी साथी कुछ और अगर सुझाव हो आपका तो आप रख सकते हैं। और जो आपको लगता है कि क्योंकि ये अच्छा मौका है, आपको लोग सुन भी रहे हैं और ये बात यूट्यूब पे रहेगी तो हमेशा के लिए रहेगी आपकी बात। तो और कोई भी अगर सुझाव है तो जरूर दे सकते हैं आप लोग। कोई भी एक सुझाव और।
सुझाव हो या कोई एक्सपीरियंस हो, कुछ कुछ भी हो।
ओके।
सुझाव देने का मतलब ये है सर, कोई भी हमारे सभी मतलब कि कंपनी में आते हैं ऑपरेटर लोग भर्ती होने के लिए, उनका इंटरव्यू नहीं लिया जाता है, उनका ट्रायल नहीं लिया जाता है, डायरेक्ट मशीन पे बैठा दिया जाता है और उससे हादसा हो जाता है सर।
बिल्कुल सही है, यही हम सुनते हैं। ऑपरेटर भी नहीं रखते, हेल्पर रख लेते हैं और मशीन पे काम करवाते हैं।
अब कोई मीटिंग नहीं, कोई कंपनी में मीटिंग नहीं होता है सर। ऑडिट आने से पहले 2-4 दिन पहले मीटिंग बुला लेते हैं, कंपनी बंद करवा देते हैं 1 घंटे के लिए, सारे वर्कर आ जाते हैं, मीटिंग हो जाता है कि हमारे ऑडिट आ रहे हैं कंपनी में, थोड़ा साफ सफाई चाहिए, जूता वूता पहन के आना। उसके बाद ऑडिट वाले चले जाते हैं तो जूता न चप्पल कुछ नहीं, न कान का, न टोपी, न कुछ, कोई चीज नहीं मिलता है सेफ्टी के लिए सर। मैं यही सुझाव देना चाहता हूँ।
बहुत अच्छे। सुचिता जी, कुछ और बोलना चाहेंगी आप?
जी सर, हम हमारे वर्कर को परमानेंट नौकरी मिलना चाहिए।
क्यों क्यों जरूरत है परमानेंट की आपको?
सैलरी खाते में जानी चाहिए,
हम्म
हरियाणा के ग्रेड मिलने चाहिए।
हम्म हम्म आपके जो साथी, आप 100 200 साथियों से मिले, उनको क्या किसी लिखत पढ़त होती है उनके साथ काम की? कोई सैलरी स्लिप मिलती है क्या? क्या चक्कर है, क्या चलता है?
नहीं, जितना साथी मैं जोड़ी हूँ किसी के सैलरी स्लिप ना मिलती।
किसी को नहीं मिलती? आप कितनी कितनी लेडीज वर्कर्स को जानती होंगी, आपने देखा होगा आसपास?
बहुत देखती हूँ सर, और जब से मेरे जानकारी हुई है एक दूसरे से बात भी करती हूँ।
हाँ हाँ। उनमें से किसी का नुकसान हुआ है आपकी तरह? आपके तो जैसे आपके हाथ का नुकसान हुआ?
कुछ का नुकसान भी हुए हैं और कुछ अच्छी लेडी जैसे के नुकसान ना हो वो भी मिलती है।
अच्छी बात। हाँ 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 हाँ। ठीक है ठीक है। मंजीत, आप कुछ जोड़ना चाहेंगे इसमें, इससे पहले कि मैं उसको क्लोज करूं?
मैं यही जोड़ना चाहूंगा, समस्याएं तो हमारे साथियों ने बहुत सारी आइडेंटिफाई की है, और सबसे रिक्वेस्ट भी करूंगा जो रिपोर्ट है उसका हिस्सा है, जो हम सारी चीजें यहाँ पर नहीं बता पाएंगे अभी, और हमारे साथी भी नहीं बता पाएंगे। तो रिपोर्ट में बहुत सारी चीजें इन्होंने लिखी हैं पूरे एक साल के अंदर। इन्होंने करीब 200 से ज्यादा लोगों से तो ये डायरेक्ट मिले हैं, लेकिन उन रिकॉर्ड में नोट किया है, इन्होंने नाम नोट किया है, लेकिन उससे कहीं ज्यादा वो उनसे मिलके और उनसे बातचीत की है। तो बहुत सारे लोगों से, करीब 500 से ऊपर लोगों से मिलके रिपोर्ट का ये इन्होंने ये बनाई है। तो रिपोर्ट में बहुत सारी चीजें और निकल के आएंगी जो आप।
शुक्रिया शुक्रिया शुक्रिया। इससे पहले कि मैं ये सेशन बंद करूं, हमें 15 मिनट की देर थी, हम उसमें 5 मिनट रिकवर कर लेंगे यहाँ पर। कि दो बातें, एक तो आपने सबका सुना, जैसे सबने बोला, ये साथियों ने रिपोर्ट बनाई है। हिंदी, आधी रिपोर्ट हिंदी में है, आधी इंग्लिश में है, क्योंकि हमें कुछ ट्रांसलेट करना पड़ा ऑडियंस के लिए। लेकिन मैं आपको कुछ कोट्स उनकी पढ़ के सुनाना चाहता हूँ रिपोर्ट से, जो यहाँ हमारे सुनने वाले हैं। अगर किसी का सवाल है यहाँ पर तो सवाल ज़रूर डालें, और हम कोशिश कर सकते हैं अगर हो जाए तो। और ये आप धनराज और साक्षी आपस में डिसाइड कर लें अगर किसी एक को पुल कर सकते हैं। मैं कुछ कोट्स आपको पढ़ के सुनाना चाहता हूँ। हमें प्रोडक्शन, क्वालिटी और एचआर तीनों की सुननी पड़ती है। ये श्रमिक बोल रहे हैं, मैं सिर्फ पढ़ रहा हूँ। प्रोडक्शन और क्वालिटी वाले एक जैसा भी नहीं सोचते। जब ज्यादा टारगेट होता है तो ऑपरेटर कभी कभी खुद ही सेंसर बंद करके काम करने लगता है। स्प्रिंग को भी खुद ही ठीक करके काम चलाना पड़ता है, क्योंकि प्रोडक्शन जरूरी है। मशीन की इज्जत है, लेकिन वर्कर की इज्जत नहीं है। सबसे बड़ा कारण प्रोडक्शन टारगेट है। कंपनी अकेले अकेले बात करने पर कुछ बढ़ा देती है, साथ में बोलो तो कहते हैं यूनियन लीडर बनना चाहते हो क्या? जब सब कुछ साफ है तो देखकर ऑडिट वालों को खुद समझ जाना चाहिए कि कुछ गलत है। ऑडिट के दिन कंपनी कहती है आराम से काम करो, सब साफ सुथरा रहता है। कंपनी हमें तोड़ती है। एक्सीडेंट का रिकॉर्ड रखने का कोई रजिस्टर नहीं है। सेफ्टी ऑडिट वाले वर्कर की स्थिति, भाड़े पर कोई सवाल नहीं पूछा जाता। हमारे यहां कोई सेफ्टी समिति नहीं है। आज तक कोई ट्रेनिंग नहीं हुई है। प्रोडक्शन के कारण ही सबसे ज्यादा एक्सीडेंट होते हैं। मशीन की मेंटेनेंस पर कोई ध्यान नहीं रहता। जब वर्कर तेजी से काम करता है उसे नहीं समझ आता कि खतरा कहां है। अगर वर्कर थोड़ा सा भी फ्री है तो झाड़ू भी लगवा देते हैं। ईएसआईसी बहुत मुश्किल है, वहां जाना मतलब 2-3 दिन का भत्ता। कई बार एक्सीडेंट होने पर उसका टाइम हमसे अलग लिखवा लेते हैं। जब हम फैक्ट्री से बाहर आते हैं तो आजाद लगता है तिहाड़ से निकले हैं। मुझे कहा है कि कह दो कि घर पर चोट लग गई है। सेंसर लगने से प्रोडक्शन लगभग 20 से 30% घटेगा, और कंपनी कहती है सेंसर बहुत महंगा है। हेल्पर को कह देते हैं कि देख कर सीख लो, अब चलाना शुरू कर दो। गेट पास के बिना बाहर नहीं जा सकते, और समय से पहले गेट पास मुश्किल से मिलता है। हम 10.5 घंटे की शिफ्ट करते हैं, कोई ओवरटाइम नहीं मिलता। हमें हरियाणा का ग्रेड नहीं मिलता। ठेकेदारी के कारण हमारा कंपनी से कोई संबंध नहीं रहता। हम सब सवाल पूछते हैं तो ठेकेदार जगह बदल देता है। कंपनी लिखती है मैंने सुना नहीं, मैंने देखा नहीं, मैंने पूछा नहीं, तो सारी गलती क्या वर्कर की ही है? जब गर्मी ज्यादा थी और हमने कूलर की बात करी तो एचआर बोला तुम लोगों को नींद आने लगेगी। बड़ी कंपनी को ऑडिट टीम अचानक बिना बताए भेजनी चाहिए। दिन में हम 5 घंटे से ज्यादा सो नहीं पाते। बराबर काम करने पर भी हम महिलाओं को बराबर पैसा नहीं मिलता। महंगाई इतनी है कि घर से दोनों लोगों को काम करना पड़ता है। पावर प्रेस में सबसे ज्यादा खतरा है, पर इसमें सबसे कम पैसा मिलता है। इसको बड़ा काम नहीं मानते, मतलब स्किल्ड लेबर नहीं मानते। झूठ है ये जो इनको बताया जा रहा है। अगर हम काम करने से मना कर दें तो कोई दूसरा वर्कर तैयार हो जाएगा। जूते और ग्लव्स का पैसा पगार से काट लेते हैं। मैं रुक जाता हूं, ऐसी बहुत चीजें पार्टिसिपेटरी रिसर्च में है और उसकी समरी भी है। इससे पहले कि मैं रुकूं, मैं ये कहना चाहता हूं कि सुचेता जी, दिनेश जी, राम जी, आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आने को। आपने अपना एक्सपीरियंस आप सबके साथ साझा किया। हम इकट्ठे मिलेंगे आपके बाकी साथियों के साथ, इस रिपोर्ट को आगे बढ़ाएंगे। और अगर आपका साथ रहा तो फरीदाबाद में भी और हमारे जो दूसरे सेंटर में भी हर जगह हम ये रिपोर्ट करेंगे, हर जगह रिसर्च करेंगे आपके साथ। और क्रस्ट रिपोर्ट में आगे हमेशा एक पार्टिसिपेटरी रिसर्च जो साथियों की है उसका हिस्सा रहेगा, हमेशा हिस्सा रहेगा। इसके लिए बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। मैं यहाँ रुक जाता हूँ और मैं वापस सरोजा को हैंडल कर देता हूँ ताकि वो अपना एक्सपर्ट पैनल चला पाए। थैंक यू सो मच। थैंक यू धीरज। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Sandeep. That was a very, very, I have to say, heavy panel. And hopefully the next one will be equally engaging and important. But I think what we hear from the workers is something totally different from what the rest of us know about. So this next panel is on the subject of the role of top 10 automobile brands in improving worker safety in their supply chains, helping India improve manufacturing professionalism. As we mentioned earlier, we believe that the automobile sector is the one that has to change the whole manufacturing supply chain professionalism in this country, and it is the need of the hour. To discuss this subject, we have today with us Dr. Harpreet Kaur, who's a business and human rights specialist at the UNDP, Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan, who is a former editor, Business Line, and a senior journalist, Mr. Srihari Palya, senior policy analyst and researcher, India Spent, and Mr. Sunil Arora, Abilities India Pistons and Rings, and he's also on the executive committee of ACMA, the Automotive Component Manufacturers Association. And Sandeep will also be joining us. You've all heard what the presentations as well as what the workers had to say. So maybe we can start with introductory thoughts that you all have. Dr. Kaur, if I might start with you, maybe you could also give a global perspective to this whole issue that we are debating here. Over to you, ma'am.
Sure. No, thank you, Saroja, and thank you everyone, I think, for a very, very insightful, sort of description. And really thank you workers को सबसे ज़्यादा आप लोगों को बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया और धन्यवाद, because I think हम लोग बहुत ही ऊंचे लेवल और हाई लेवल पे काम करते हैं जहाँ पे हम बड़ी बड़ी पॉलिसीज की बात करते हैं, बट इतना ज़रूरी है कि आप लोग अपनी जुबानी अपने एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर करें। और आई थिंक जब आप लोग ये एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर करते हैं अपनी जुबानी, इससे काफ़ी फर्क पड़ता है, बिकॉज हम लोगों को ये एक्सपीरियंसेस नहीं है, एंड अनफॉर्चुनेटली आप लोगों के साथ ये एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं, सो हम लोग बातें कर सकते हैं, बट आई थिंक जब आप अपना एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करते हैं, जब आई थिंक उस जितनी क्रेडिबिलिटी उससे आती है, सो थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर really sharing your experiences. I think Saroja, just in terms of sort of what you said in terms of the global, sort of reflections in terms of, where we are. I was just kind of reflecting on the report that was shared earlier, but really what I was thinking in the context of that the automotive industry, much like any other industry these days, can really not sustain long-term global success while dismissing sort of worker safety and poor working conditions. I think the time is gone. It can't continue like this, what we've been, the situation has been. And where I see is, investing in worker safety and well-being is also not just a moral imperative. It's not just a good thing to do, but there's a strategic business decision, I think, that drives operational efficiency, financial performance, but also just in terms of the long-term sustainability. And maybe I think I'll start by saying the worker safety and well-being is definitely fundamental to productivity, brand reputation, and compliance with global standards. And I think particularly because you had asked me to also focus a little bit on in terms of, connecting with the ESG or the environment, social, and governance criteria. But I think it's become even more critical to focus on this because this is becoming a much more stronger and stringent requirement from many of the global standards, including the new European Union's directive on corporate sustainable due diligence directive, but also in terms of the way that you're seeing import bans and other regulations globally that are taking place. In India, I think with BRSR reporting an increased focus, particularly from the Corporate Affairs Ministry, and also sort of looking at other business players in terms of the ESG criteria, I think this has become a really critical issue. Why it's important? I think because, we know that unsafe conditions lead to sort of higher injuries, absenteeism, turnover, disrupting operational and escalating costs, while also damaging reputation and deterring investors and global partnerships. And this non-compliance with labor law risks fines, lawsuits, and trade barriers. And there have been many cases where we have seen that the businesses have had not just reputational risk, but also operational, financial, legal, and regulatory risk, really further impacting, their competitiveness in the market. So I think this is also very critical, particularly for this industry, because the automotive industry's reliance on skilled workers, I think, makes worker safety really, really essential for maintaining supply chain stability and fostering some strong supplier relationships. So what I'm saying here is, the global success in the automotive industry requires not just innovation in technology and design, but really a robust commitment to the ethical labor practices. And dismissing worker safety, well-being might yield sort of some short-term cost savings, but I think will eventually, or inevitably lead to the operational inefficiencies, again, and financial liabilities. And we have seen over and over, and I'm happy to share some of the other examples, but we've seen that the companies that invest in creating safe, equitable, and inclusive workplaces are more likely to build resilient supply chains. They attract global partnerships and kind of maintain a competitive edge in increasingly, conscientious sort of global market as well. So just to end, this part by saying what I see is that investing in worker safety is a win-win strategy for the industry. And it isn't just an expense, but I think it really is an investment and a very powerful investment in the company's future. So it's the time that, in terms of looking at the regulatory, but also sort of the non-regulatory pressures, it isn't something that the businesses can ignore anymore. Thanks, Saroja. Happy to answer any follow-up questions that you may have.
Mr. Arora, if I might ask you, what are the steps that you see the industry take, and how are they, playing out in the marketplace right now? And again, going back global as well as, the domestic market, what are the steps that you've been seeing on worker safety? So you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Over almost 4 decades in this industry, I've seen a lot of changes come around, and for the better. Safety is kind of critically paramount. Maruti has 10 pillars where you have to be green. You must be green in all those pillars if you want to get new businesses, and safety is one of those pillars. So, and that is true for all OEMs in India and abroad. So safety is, of course, has been playing out over the years, not so much maybe 20 years ago, but now it's become so critical that you cannot survive in your business if you are what I heard today is a story that probably plays out in the tier 3s or the tier 4s of the automotive industry, where unfortunately it's not so much regulated by the tier 1s. I think the tier 1s go and regulate their tier 2s, but the tier 2s have to regulate the tier 3s and the tier 4s, because the automotive industry supply chain runs very deep. You have to understand that. That is a challenge, yes, and these stories that are emanating, that there are, all the things which are not according to labor laws are being are being told in this forum, which is heartbreaking, but that's the reality. But in my company, for example, we've been growing at a CAGR of about 23% over the last since COVID, and we are still an MSME, but we are a tier 1, and we supply 45% of our products to global customers across the globe, whether it's Europe or it's America or it's China or it's Japan. So that is, safety is a paramount consideration. Safety makes business sense. Let me just say that if you are not a safe company, your customers are not going to look at you. They will find out sooner or later. I heard stories that वो audit के time आते हैं, फिर वो ये करते हैं, वो करते हैं. Customers are smart these days. Customers will know if you're a safe company or not. And when they walk through your shop floors, they can make out that this is a safe company or an unsafe company. So it's very clear. I mean, these guys are now trained. They have been through hundreds of companies. They instantly point out an anomaly in safety instantly. So we've been doing ACMA cluster programs for over 20 years now. And the latest one, after all the growth that we've had, we've joined a TPM cluster, which means safety and housekeeping, which we've been doing for 20 years. And I still feel that we have a much more, steps to go forward in. So we've initiated this 18-month program specifically for our company, where all our people are going to be trained over and over again in safety and housekeeping. Because, and then of course maintenance, so how to maintain your machines and how. It's a basic program. It's based on the Japanese culture of TPM, but that's what we are doing in spite of having aspirations to become a $100 million company by 2030. But I told my guys, listen, growth is good, but don't forget your basics. And when you grow, you kind of try and compromise on things. That I've seen a lot happening in so many companies. यहाँ पर ये हो गया. And by the way, unsafe companies vanish into thin air. By the way, आग लग जाएगी या कुछ हो जाएगा, they just go away. So safety is absolutely paramount, and I think it makes great business sense. And I would only urge my colleagues, if there are any people here on this Zoom call, and I think we train our tier 2s, but whether they train their tier 3s, I think that chain has to now go forward, because Maruti has been insisting train your tier 2s, so we've been doing that. But whether they've been doing that to their tier 3s, I have a lot of doubt on that. And that's where all these very sorry stories emanate from.
Thank you, Mr. Arora. Mr. Raghavan, if I might come to you, what does your perception of how the top brands are moving on this subject of worker safety, and what can really push them and the rest of us to actually make this change on the ground?
I think eventually it comes down to actually market economics, because, companies are driven first, last, and foremost by the need to be efficient, to maximize margins, and so on. But what is often not realized, particularly by many of the smaller players, is that safety and efficiency in production go hand in hand. So when there is an accident, there is a worker who gets injured, but also a machine which gets damaged. In fact, I heard in the workers' voices presentation, quite often they say, machine ki zyada izzat hai, worker ki nahi hai. No. But the reverse also I've heard from this thing that look, this one single machine cost me 12 crores, but these guys treat it like some random this thing, so they don't take care of it properly. No matter what training we give, they damage it, and that costs me much more. So I think this realization has to be broadcast through because production processes which are designed, and that engineers don't design processes and machines for people to get hurt, right? I mean, by and large, when a piece of equipment is designed or a production process is designed, the people who do that take into account the possibility of injuries and work precautions into that. Injuries happen or accidents happen because these are either not implemented or ignored or bypassed or given up somewhere along the way as various things break down or repairs happen or whatever. So I think this realization, this education has to happen amongst the manufacturers, and the big companies have to take the lead. But I think it was the CIA which came up with the concept of plausible deniability. So you do something which is really, the state can't take ownership of. So you do it, but you allow the person at the top, say the president, to deny with absolute honesty that he had no knowledge of such a thing by simply not telling them. So, but it's a corporate sector which has sort of embraced plausible deniability. So when you talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, what does it mean? Right? Ms. Arora said customers are smart. Yes, they are. So are the big companies. The big 10 are smart. They know exactly what is happening down the value chain. They choose not to pursue it beyond a point, right? That must change. They must be held accountable. And I think that kind of pressure has to come from the marketplace, from this thing. And particularly now that the Indian automobile sector is not wholly domestic centric and it is a reasonably large exporter, because in India what is happening is that we have the rules, we have the regulations, but everybody looks on it, so even the government, the government's intentions are fine, right? And that's why these laws and regulations exist. But what happens at the execution level? The execution level, every regulation is simply seen as an opportunity for rent seeking. First and foremost, and if that's not possible, then the regulation is, attempted. You talk to any factory owner, will say that, look, I mean, whenever there is this thing, these guys only go looking around so that they can extract money from me. They're not there to they're not looking at it from the point of view of safety of the worker or whatever. So I think, you need to work on all the stakeholders. So the big 10 companies, they really have to take ownership of the whole chain and not just what they say they are in control of it. The rest I don't know. There was a very telling comment by the workers again, and that's, I think, something which needs to be hammered in here, which is that maine dekha nahi, maine suna nahi, maine pucha nahi. What does not happen directly within my control, I'm not responsible for. I don't know about it. I don't need to do anything about it. That needs to be changed. And that can, I think, only happen because in the West, a lot of this changed because of investor pressure. You had big stakeholders, large investors who sort of feel in India, the ownership structure is very different, right? So we have majority promoter ownership, or in the case of foreign companies, it is sort of majority owned by the foreign owner, and there are retail shareholders, but they're too diffuse and they don't come together on such issues. And we don't have any strong institutional investor who's able to leverage some kind of action on this, right? So investor pressure is ruled out. I think social pressure, activism, publicity with the consumers market. Again, in your film, which was shown at the start uh, of this meeting, there was a lady I saw who mentioned that, you know, as a car owner, as a driver, you know, do I know whether my vehicle has been, made with lost limbs and fingers? I don't know. And I think that's a very important, statement to take note of. How can we build that awareness that, that there has to be some kind of that, because that's the only pressure which is going to work. So, two or three things. I think the big companies have to work with their total supply chain and take ownership of the whole supply chain, and also educate them on the fact that, efficiency is linked to safety, is linked to this thing. So when you do a production process right, you reduce the risk of accidents. And when you do it right, when you're doing it the way it was designed to, you're producing at maximum efficiency. It's in your interest to do it, right? The second is, I think, in the sort of kind of purchase agreements, I think, when you do an audit, these are the kind of things that these questions need to be asked. Because multiple workers have said that, if we get unreasonable targets, and that's when all the safety speed breakers are taken out and we just forced to produce, and accidents happen, injuries happen, deaths happen. So, but why are those targets happening? Because some order has been placed. I think there has to be a process which catches this and say, how can you reasonably expect whatever 1 million steering columns to be made within such a limited time frame? Right? But still you demand that you do it. So you know that what the consequence of that is going to be. So these kind of questions, these kind of detail, this thing, that also needs to be done. And I think, we also need to sort of, work with the government, and really clean up the sort of regulatory implementation, supervisory side of this. It's not that we don't have the laws or the regulations that are not being implemented. And again, I don't think that, at the top, it's, everything is seen as an opportunity to collect rent, so there are people who are sincerely committed to this, but how does that get translated into an effective message at the operational level? Your first responsibility is to, ensure this, that kind of thing. So I think a sort of three-pronged approach, multi-pronged approach is the only way that we can sort of improve the thing, because believe me, the industry is very well aware of the kind of statistics that you're putting out, right? But nobody will, in their official report, they will not use the numbers you put out. They will use the numbers put out by the state government or the industry department. Why? Because it suits them much better. And obviously there is a huge underreporting happening out there. So these are things, which you need to chip away at all these things for there to be a sort of collective improvement in the status on the ground. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Palya, you've been covering this space independently for a few years now. What are the changes you've seen on the ground, and what do you believe will bring, from your angle, what is the tipping point that will bring some change to, make us all feel more comfortable than we are today?
Thanks, Roja. Yeah, much of my inputs are focused based on the reporting that I've done last couple of years, limited reporting. But based on the data that I have had and based on the conversations, many of them already participants in this group, including Manjeet ji and Suchita ji and all that. I mean, we see that there is only very limited improvement. The problem with injuries that we see in the auto sector, I mean, I believe that there is a fundamental problem in terms of how the entire system is getting mapped. Beyond the tier one, I don't think there is any kind of visibility many of the OEMs have. But the problem is this is only backed by, I mean, in terms of data, like Srini was saying, in terms of data, what is available with us is probably DG Firstly data that you sort of highlighted, which is bare, which is just bare minimum. It's probably not collating all the data in terms of all the injuries data, fatality data that are available in this entire sector or in other registered factories, non-registered factories. So the problem that I see is that organizations like SII have to come in and sort of plug that space, and when that doesn't get taken seriously by the government, that becomes a problem in terms of accountability and visibility. But the important part is that with the reporting itself, when I went out in July and spoke to quite a lot of women workers, the fact is that they are seeing some sort of they're relying on SIA's services and coming forward in terms of looking at what kind of support is available, and they're becoming aware. The numbers itself show that there are more women coming in, there are more workers coming in to sort of avail these services, and they're also identifying the problems. What the workers did today in terms of mapping, in terms of participatory research, that is something I believe that needs to be done by OEMs and their supply chain, if that is possible. I mean, when I spoke to experts, the larger problem is that the supply chain itself is so widespread geographically. Is it possible for them to sort of identify the problems? Even if they're identifying the problems, are they taking the initiative to sort of move forward? In terms of some other sectors, for example, I had gone to Surat, where there are similar issues in the power loom sector. You have similar accidents. Probably the context is different, but the fact is that these places also don't report accidents, and the supply chain is not as deep as the auto sector. So it's largely seeming that the problem is that it's an epidemic, but nobody wants to sort of identify it publicly. Somewhere, disparately, there's no convergence between what's, let's say, ESIC has some data that talks about disabilities and accidents. DG Firstly has some information, SI has some information, but none of this is coming together. So for me, from my perspective, I think there are three issues, three aspects that need to be sort of considered. One is there a vent for workers, even within their shop floors, even the establishment, to sort of raise a complaint and that being heard at a proper platform without some kind of reprisal on them? How well is the entire auto sector sort of mapping these tier 3, tier 4 organizations, which is far more widespread, without that issue of it being pushed to the fringes, this informality sort of being pushed to the fringes? And finally, like I said, the government also needs to intervene at some point, because right now, with SIA's data itself, which is terrific data, it's largely limited to the work in Maharashtra and Haryana, and that too in limited locations. This to be done at scale and for some kind of serious intervention, only I think behemoth like the state governments or the union governments can sort of. So that is something that needs to be considered in terms of bringing everything together. All stakeholders need to be heard. Yes.
Just had a comment, which kind of runs through what all of you said. Global organizations map their global supply chain, and yet in India we say that within India we can't map the second tier or the third tier. It kind of doesn't sit well, right? I mean, there's something more that we need to do clearly on this.
What happens is, Saroja, that in the advanced countries, Germany, the Mittelstand is a 50 million euro company, and that's their small company, 50 million euros. In India, you have companies which are not even 50 crores who are in the supply chain. With 30 crores, 20 crores, that is the critical difference. And these are the guys who use these presses which are unsafe. Instead of using a very good press which costs a lot of a lot more money, they're using these presses from in Ludhiana or Rajkot, and they're getting away with it. There has to be, as you rightly said, that the OEMs need to kind of define that if any product is made from such an unsafe equipment and probably Sandeep can, put this through to all the big 10 companies, draw up a list of the things that your, selected audience has, your audience has told us today. These machines should not be in the supply chain, period. And it will find the light of the day. ACMA will support it. We don't want people to get hurt. So we need to start, and we need to start now. And by the way, from 4 million cars, we are talking of 9 to 10 million cars by the turn of the decade. What we did in 40 years is going to happen in the next 7-8 years because of the aspirations of the people. There's going to be so many more production units, so many more accidents. The time to do it is now. And make a list, get it banned. And if anybody is found using such a machine down the supply chain, you're out. You have to be strict. There is no other way in a democracy. In China, I used to go there 25 years ago. I still do. They had similar problems. And then they, it's not a democracy. They just put a diktat out there. These machines are out, and they're out. And then the Chinese have state support, by the way. They get, you walk into a factory which is the size of a football. They've got machines lying there which are unused, all paid for by the state. So that's a different story. But here we need to kind of start doing some sort of, punitive measures for companies to. And it's not difficult, Sandeep. If you try and raise this list, circulate it, we'll make sure that everybody at least in the north, all these big companies, they will call ACMA, and then we'll say we support it, and then we'll take the ACMA president there. So it can happen. If you like, this can happen.
That's very encouraging to hear. Any other comments before?
Sorry, Saroja. I mean, if I could just add, I couldn't agree, more with Mr. Sunil in terms of, what they're saying in terms of sort of looking at the advanced economies. But I just also do want to highlight that these are also the countries, we're kind of taking example of Germany, but these are also the countries, where unions play a critical role in protecting workers' rights. So, the role of unions and collectivization, which I know is not the primary and focus area of SAFE in India, but I think, we're talking about countries where unions are really integral to sort of the co-determination systems, where workers participate in management decisions. So, in terms of how management is making decisions through work councils and representation on company boards. And I think that's a big difference from, the way that we see our own sort of situation in our own country. So I think as much as it's great to hear these workers' voices here, but I think we cannot also undermine the importance and the significance of the unions and collectivization and kind of bringing these issues to the fore as of course, what we can, continue with the consumers' pressures or the public pressures, but I think that's an equally important part of it. And, some focus needs to be played on that as well. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Sandeep, finally, I'll ask you, in the last 8 years, what are the changes you have seen and what are the next steps that you would like to take as SII?
Sure. Thanks, Saroja. I want to just add a couple of bits to what have been said by the panelists very powerfully, actually. Sunil, I mean, you are an example, and chat shows there are comments about this, that if business looks at working conditions, it can do very well. 23% growth every year per year with your kind of ambitions. Other MSMEs can do too, right? So this point that safety is bad for business is misunderstood, and everybody needs to understand that. I have to clarify, 22% of accidents happen in ACMA members. So tier 1 is also part of this problem. And we all know that some businesses, not yours, Sunil, that's why you're here, but we know some businesses where some of their factories are fantastic, others are not. So, supply chains have got formed for a reason, and cheaper components are being made. And when they are made cheaper and cheaper, there's a race to the bottom. Then there is compromise on either human rights and or environment. And that's what we need to, dig ourselves out of from to be more, scalable. I think this plausible deniability point, Mr. Srinivasan, is an excellent point. We have gone to the investors now. We have gone to the ESG consultants who are writing the reports of these brands, and we have raised the issue with them of doing better reporting themselves, because we are seeing that the tough questions are not being answered at all. They're being avoided or not being reported properly. And Haryana Human Rights Commission, Saroja, partially to your question, Haryana Human Rights Commission filed a suo motu. We didn't know for 3 years. We had no role to play in it. But they filed a suo motu against Maruti Hero Honda based on our first report, Crush 2019. And that case is still going on, right? So we will see what comes out of it. We have now played our role as we have been invited. This point, Shrihari, that you make about, the state versus the business, our theory of change is, and I believe it's strongly having come from business, 50 years of my life was in business, is business today is far stronger than politics, right? Just look at Trump and Musk, and we don't have to go very far. If business wants it, it will be done. It will be done by the government. So we think now the dog is, the tail is wagging the dog, right? So if the business wants, which means if the brands want, these are the one of the most powerful companies in the country. Yes, the same problem exists in textile sector, but they are much smaller players. And several others. These are the 10 most powerful players in the country in terms of brands, and they make 55,000 crores rupees profits every year, plus, right? So there is potential here to change not just the auto sector industry, but have an halo effect on rest of the industry. So rest of the manufacturing. So it's not an unsurmountable problem. So Saroja, back to your question. What we have seen until now, and we are thankful and grateful for a lot of this, 9 of the top 10 brands are talking to us sporadically, as I said, but there is some good action. Even when they don't talk to us, there is movement. Sunil is absolutely right. We have heard from many other people of many brands talking to the suppliers about it, some doing about it. The Japanese companies actually have been the best of the spectrum as of now. So Maruti Suzuki first, Honda next, and now thankfully Bajaj, an Indian company which is coming up and doing it much better than others. I would say the other Indian companies are not playing the game as well, but the progress has begun. Mahindra started talking to us this year. Ashok Leyland is yet to talk to us, but progress is going on. Similarly, and there are initiatives. Saroja showed a slide. If we look at our Safety Niti report, we see a number of policy improvements. That has to be the start before implementation improves, right? Implementation is beginning now, but long way to go. We believe it's a generational game. Government working group set up by Central Ministry during Mr. Santosh Gangwar's time came up with the recommendations. Some of them progressed, others not. I talked about Haryana Human Rights Commission. BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards, approved a recommendation for a safety standard for power press. That has to be made into a law, so that will go on for some time, right? We have now a partnership with Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Through their Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, we'll be publishing a report on the compliance by the automobile top 50 listed companies with NGRBC, National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct, under which they have to submit BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. The quality of that submission and a tool to make that better is something we are working on along with Ministry of Corporate Affairs. That report will come out this year. Also coming year, we will have an entirely new initiative going on. It started this month. We will be publishing the comparison between 5 states, which are the main auto sector hubs. So Shriri, actually, there are only very few auto sector hubs. If you crack those, it'll be 80% of the problem, right? So 5 states, Haryana, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Gujarat, right? You cover these, you've covered 80%. If Sunil can correct me actually if I'm going wrong in this, right? So in these 5 states, we shall be going to 200 workers each in the auto sector supply chain and publishing a safety index and an ESIC compliance and satisfaction index to compare states' best practices, opportunities, gaps. And we'll be publishing a report which hopefully, like the ASER report of education, will become over a period of time a benchmark for which state is doing better, which hub is doing better, which brand is doing better, as advised by the workers. So it'll be a trend that will get established over a period of time, right? I can go on. We will keep publishing CRUSH reports every year. We'll keep publishing Safety Niti reports every year, every 6 months. So there is no way to hide. The data will be out there. And the fact is that government may not put it on paper, but they accept meetings and they accept a few actions. And the day they move, it will be a big move. You're absolutely right. So we are hoping to move some of those things, and we'll carry on with that journey. I'll stop here. Harpreet has a hand up.
No, thanks, Sandeep. I'll be very brief. I'm also just conscious of the time. I think what you said about, some of these Japanese companies taking, in some ways championing or, taking much more stronger actions, it may be an opportunity for us to reflect on, does the fact that Japan has now a national action plan on business and human rights, and they have their own Japanese guidelines on responsible business conduct that kind of prioritize, ethical and sustainable practices, human rights respect, environmental responsibility, fair business practices, ethical labor practices are all included in the Japanese responsible business guidelines, right? Which means any Japanese companies, wherever it is implementing, or wherever it has its supply chains and operations, they have to ensure human rights due diligence within their supply chains. Is that the reason? So I think something that you may want to kind of assess and look at that. And is that something that we can encourage the Indian government and sort of the Indian industry to kind of look at from that perspective? The second thing perhaps could be again sort of forward looking from here we are is, and maybe you're already doing this, but sometimes what happens is that the peers wants to hear from peers. In some ways, can we organize peer learning and exchange, where the Japanese companies could share their experiences, because it's not like it's like what drove them to take these actions and what were their own anxieties, how did they manage and overcome those anxieties and took actions that they took, and is it worth to kind of bring some of these companies who have taken an action with the others who have not, to kind of create a more more of a dialogue platform where they can learn from each other, but also just to kind of have that exchange going forward. So yeah, just wanted to kind of reflect on that very quickly.
We have one question that's come online from Rakhi Sehgal, and she says, since most of these supplier companies are MSMEs, has SII been working with local MSME industry associations, and maybe they can be persuaded to come together with the help of Ministry of MSME, set up a collective cluster level training center and pledge to only employ these registered and trained workers. So, Mr. Arora, I'll ask you, is there an initiative like this already in place? I mean, SII is one small, part of this whole thing, but the industry itself, what it's doing is likely more interesting for us.
To give you an honest answer, no, there is nothing happening. I know of so many small industry organizations. Safety is not on the priority of those organizations. So I'm being very candid, but that's the way they operate. They have
this is not just safety, it's also training of workers, employing certified workers, a movement towards something that formalizes, the kind of training operators that we need.
I am not aware, for example, companies like us who are OEM to Maruti, we have to have a dojo center in our company, and that has to be certified green. Maruti has to approve the training center, and only then workers are put into that dojo center for 1 week, and then they have classroom training, and we have registered teachers here, and then they teach, and then after 9 days or 10 days of training, do they go onto a machine? I am not aware of anything like this happening in the small scale sector, in at least in North India. Man, we are facing these problems because of a cultural and a legacy issue. So things like what Sandeep and Safe in India are doing are going to raise the level awareness, and it's going to happen slowly and steadily. When there is a sizable scale, when the small scale guy who's got enough money to buy good machines, and he has got also of course got the pressure from the OEM not to use low quality machines, it's going to work hand in hand. I think in about 5-6 years, you will see that Sandeep will, Safe in India is going to be recognized in the automotive sector much more than it is today. But it will change. It is when I walk into the supply chain heads with large names that I won't take now, they ask me, "Who's Safe in India? Do you know Safe in India?" I said, "Yes, I do." So people are very much aware. All the brands are very much aware of the safety, the work that you guys are doing. But we need to, kind of empower the people who are down there with, at 1-2 crore investment. They are not going to use the best presses. That's the problem.
Yeah. Mr. Raghavan, you wanted to add. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, it is important to also really sort of, get the leadership to talk about this. And it's not just, and, talk about this in a public way, right? Because a lot of these things, I mean, you have safety councils, we have safety awards, right? But we also have one of the worst industrial safety records in the world. I mean, it's not just in the automobile sector, which is what your report has been exploring. But you take any sector. I mean, mining, it's horrendously, this thing. The accident record is abysmal. Any kind of this thing, chemicals, textiles. Srihari mentioned, wherever you go, we have a very, very poor this thing. But yet we have all these, high profile, I think, awards and discussions and these things. I think, somewhere a reality check must be provided. And I think that comes through, ultimately, I feel that the pressure has to come from the marketplace, which means that we have to sort of also look at educating customers on sort of paying some attention. The customers do pay attention to it, right? So they pay attention to issues like sustainability, fair trade. All these concepts have already been well entrenched with customers across the world, not just in developed markets, even in India. So, people pay attention to green products or pollution or whatever. So what about safety? What can we do to build some awareness and therefore some pushback from customers on this issue that something is not just sustainably produced, but also safely produced, that there is a value attached not just to the environment part of it, but also to the human cost, which is attached to that product. I think some work, if we can do that, so this report, for instance, you have 6 editions out now. I think it needs to, can we look at sort of making these numbers, there's such stark numbers. I mean, how can we bring it more into the mainstream of discussion here, make it more aware with the ordinary consumers? I think this is something which maybe SI needs to also work on, how do we need that? Because unless there is more talk about this, particularly from, people who have a bearing on the business outcome. So if it is there, whether it is with the government or regulators or with the customers, these are the only, and investors, these are the 3 big stakeholders who can influence business decisions. So how do we get the chatter level up in these 3? This thing is something which you may want to look at in future.
Thank you, Mr. Arora. You said you needed to leave. Srihari, would you like to add something? And then we can maybe get Sandeep to round up.
I'll quickly round up because I also need to attend a meeting.
Yeah.
So I agree with what Ravi is saying in terms of how do we communicate this to the larger public. I mean, part of my job is to do that, but it is questionable in terms of, how much I've been successful in achieving that. But the point is that there has been some conversation around it, and that's why, I came to know about this serious issue. The problem is we need to communicate it in a way that people are sort of aware of these issues that exist in the auto sector. I mean, almost everybody now owns a car or a bike or some automobile. And if they are aware of these issues, there is an additional pressure in terms of how businesses also react, and also how this gets reported to the larger public by media organizations, etc., and how widespread that reporting is. So I think that is also something that needs to be sort of explored. So that is my
I'll just
perspective.
add one thing here to both of you that, whenever we talk about this, almost the first reaction is, I don't want to know about these kind of things. And I think that resistance to this information is pretty high. And we need to break it together. I mean, in some way, we need to figure out how to get people to kind of look beyond the, horror and get into how can we solve this problem. So over to you, Sandeep.
Okay, I'll close the day with first gratitude and thanks to the panel, Harpreet, Mr. Srinivas, Srihari. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sunil, of course. Saroja, thank you for running the panel. I mean, all I have to say at the end is we believe it's a generational journey. I think, Mr. Srinivas, you said it right. All we can do is accelerate India's curve to this improvement. I don't see a step jump given our socioeconomics, but it also makes me think that it's not an unsurmountable problem. Solutions are in sight. We are working on those. Some of those things have started taking shape, and we believe it will make a difference. And what we have been able to do until now is we have put this issue on the map. 6 years back, people didn't realize how significant this issue is in the auto sector. People knew that something was happening, but happening to tens of thousands of people every year, lakhs of people, over a decade or more. Add the families, you're talking a significant percentage of productivity loss to India, human loss of dignity to people and families. This is something we think we have put on the map. And like most places, whether it's the government or the brands or the suppliers, there are good people everywhere. So we are appealing to their conscience and saying, you need to do something about it. We are appealing to their morals and ethical sense, but also business sense, because one of my favorite stories, and I'll probably end with this almost, is the Rana Plaza story in Bangladesh. You've all heard about it, read about it, you know probably more about it than I do. And I've met some of these Bangladeshi business people. Actually, Harpreet invited me a UN forum. I met some of them there. And what I know of this is the following, and I've read lots of papers about it, spoken to professors in Bangladesh and the UK and everywhere else. 2013, Bangladesh had a fire in a factory called Rana Plaza. 1,000 people died overnight in this fire, right? People went up in arms. Consumers went up in arms to the point of ethical consumerism that is being made here. People went up in arms. Brands had to defend themselves. Obama was the president. They actually came down on Bangladesh and the government had to do something. Literally the burning platform created an action plan, which resulted in stronger audits, stronger processes, training, all these things that we are demanding from brands and more, right? Enshrined in practices and law. The result of that over the last 11 years is the following, and it's evidenced. There were about 4,000 factories in Bangladesh at that time. Roughly 2,000 took on the game and they upgraded themselves, learned the stuff. 2,000 did not. Those who did not have got marginalized. So Sunil's point, they got marginalized. Now they're selling to Africa and low-cost items, low-value-added items, barely surviving or disappearing. The top 2,000 have become world-class. So much so that for example, when I met them at this UN forum in Nepal, I'm not kidding, their conversation with me was of a level of process of Six Sigma and certifications and stuff, which I cannot have probably with many tier 1 manufacturers in automobile brands. Forget tier 2s. They have moved ahead. When they had COVID, they knew the processes to be tweaked and changed quickly, and they did it. We were just doing jugaad still. So what has happened to textile sector despite all this tightening up? Bangladesh has accelerated its growth post 2013. India, Vietnam, Indonesia, we have all tailed off. And they have the strictest laws. It's not that they are perfect, but we can get to that level. Yes. I mean, I spoke to this industrialist, Anil Tandon. He's a textile industry manufacturer based in India and in Bangladesh. And we want to quote him in the report. And he sent me this. He argued a lot debated a lot with me, disagreed with lots of my stuff, but then he wrote this. And I'm quoting him. I have personally witnessed gradual but definite and tangible improvement in their Bangladesh processes, professionalism, efficiencies, and working conditions. Factory accidents are taken very seriously and factory audits are being made stronger even as we speak. Bangladesh has now become the leader in high-quality jeans manufacturing and has taken business from Turkey and other countries. We can learn from their experience to harness the opportunity that India has from China plus one strategy of many buyers, especially the American ones. So, I think it's an opportunity both for dignity of our people, but also business. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be in touch and look forward to your support in taking this cause further. Thank you, Saroja.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, everybody who joined. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
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 I think the videos will be up on YouTube shortly, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And the reports are there on our website. You're all welcome to download them. And I hope you will share all this information with everybody that you know and do exactly what Mr. Raghavan was telling us about. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.